Hi, welcome to our presentation from the project run in Vanuatu with support from the Australian Government called Improving Productivity with Solar Agricultural Mills in Vanuatu. This is part of the final report of the 2-year project, which was executed by Village Infrastructure Angels, funded partially by Business Partnerships Platform, as well as other funders, and implemented locally by the Vanuatu Rural Services Cooperative. Village Infrastructure Angels is a group of concerned individuals and organisations that's helping rural villages in developing countries to access the infrastructure that they need to reduce poverty and improve living standards. The DFAT Business Partnership Platform is part of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's aid program, which is engaging the private sector to deliver economic growth, incomes and jobs. Vanuatu Rural Services Cooperative was formed in December 2017 by a team that Village Infrastructure Angels helped to train up and is tasked to help deliver better services to rural villages in Vanuatu. The aim of the project is going to be discussed now. So the presentation has 4 major parts: the background, the technologies, the basic project model that was agreed to with BPP, and then the results that we found. So we'll start off with the background and the project aim. Obviously, being a project focused on delivering solar mills and solar lights to Vanuatu, this is quite focused on Sustainable Goal 7, which is to increase access to energy for villages who currently do not have it. It's to provide access to solar energy solutions for low-income and remote off-grid households in 60 villages in Vanuatu specifically, enabling them to shift from uneconomical and unsustainable fuels, such as kerosene lamps, diesel-powered mills, and wood, to modern, efficient, renewable, local energy sources. It also quite specifically aims to contribute to women's empowerment through reduced work care burden and increased household income through the solar mills by adding value to local crops and reducing manual labour. A little bit of high-level background. Where is Vanuatu at in terms of electrification? Very similar situation to Sub-Saharan Africa up until a few years ago, but is now making rapid progress towards the goal of increased access to electricity for all households, and on track to deliver this before 2030. Village Infrastructure Angels has assisted with about 10% of growth in recent years, reaching approximately that many households in off-grid Vanuatu. There's about 40,000 off-grid households, and we've reached roughly 4,000. Papua New Guinea, in the same area, is a bit behind. Much larger country, more people to work with there. So, making good progress in the Pacific, but still some work to do. A lot of you will be familiar with the tiered framework of energy access. We wanted to address this a little bit because it comes into the formation of the project design. So we had a program in Vanuatu many years ago, about 10 years ago now, that promoted solar lanterns, Tier 1 services, and reached pretty much every household. Basically, the kerosene lamps are gone since about 2012, which is great. Recent work has focused more on Tier 2 advanced solar home systems around the 5 to 10 watt level, but this framework, when Tier 2 describes lighting, TVs and fan, is very focused on consumers and household consumption. It doesn't really account for productive uses of power such as community mills, refrigeration, particularly if shared between multiple households, water pumping, school equipment, clinics, things like that. Mostly community scale needs. Tier 3 of 500 watts per household is not really necessary to gain access to 24/7 reliable power for all households. Both tiers 2 and 3 can actually be 24/7 reliable, even though the tiered framework doesn't describe it in that way. So we believe that access to energy really means something that's tier 2 plus. You have to have that reliable access to energy at the household level, but also some community needs need to be met as well. And combined, they may exceed 50 watts per household, but are probably less than 500 watts per household. So what might an access to electricity tier 2 plus package consist of? Sufficient lamps to light up the house nicely with reasonable brightness levels, phone chargers, some basic appliances for the household, including TVs, fans, music, radio, things like that, and then some of the shared community facilities such as mills, refrigerators, water pumps. So this may total up to somewhere between 100 and 200 watts per household and can be delivered for as little as half a kilowatt hour per day, pushing up to maybe 0.7, 0.8 kilowatt hours per day. So technically, many of you will be aware of Solution A, solar lanterns. In Vanuatu, basically, we've been there, done that. And it's not really access to energy in the full description of that term. It's a starting point. The world's made a lot of progress with these, but we need to step up beyond just these products. As mentioned, Lighting Vanuatu in 2009-12 basically eliminated kerosene lamps and got solar lanterns to about 95% of households. In Papua New Guinea, there's probably around 50% market penetration. But as mentioned, this is not access to electricity. The next step is solar home systems, which is a lot of the stage where Vanuatu is at the moment, which will deliver 3 to 6 lamps and some basic appliance usage to the households. These will cost about $50 to $500 per household and have somewhere between a 1 to 5 year payback. While solar lanterns mostly sell for cash sales, the market is obviously seeing a combination of both cash sales and lease purchase or pay as you go, as it's known in the market, as mechanisms to help households to afford this. Vanuatu was focused on cash sales. VIA did a lot to bring the pay-as-you-go model to Vanuatu and the Pacific in general. The New Zealand government funded a project in Vanuatu in recent years called VREP, Vanuatu Rural Electrification Program. There's 2 phases to it, so we'll describe phase 1 that's been happening so far. Phase 2 has started recently and will continue on for larger systems in the future. So VREP 1 focused mostly on 1 to 100 watt solar home systems. It's managed by the World Bank in Sydney and locally through the Vanuatu Department of Energy. It's ending around June 2020 and involved a 50% capital subsidy for what was designed as basically cash sales of such systems. It wasn't really focused on pico grids or microgrids, really focused only on Lighting Global approved solar home systems. So in the energy poverty context, we have roughly 1 billion people without access to electricity, 2 billion people using substandard stoves for cooking, but a hidden part of energy poverty we feel that's important to address is possibly up to 1 billion people processing crops by hand, with the potential to be saving billions of hours per year. And there's very little data or information on this form of energy poverty. So the solar home systems are important indeed, but by themselves we still think Tier 2 by itself is not access to energy just yet. We need to see these sorts of solutions that address the holistic needs of energy for the community also included. So VIA started working on solar milling with projects support services from Papua New Guinea, who also moved to Hong Kong to set up a global shop to deliver these sorts of solutions to market, to displace diesel mills and manual processing of crops, focus mostly on staple crops to begin with. And you can see some of the major processes that are currently being done by hand for corn, rice, wheat, and coconut, cassava and yams as well, also in there. This makes up about 70 or 80% of everything that people eat in developing countries. So just a few processes can cover all of those crops. VREP 2 is the second phase of the Vanuatu Rural Electrification Program, and that will be for larger solar home systems and business systems of a size that could potentially cover the solar mills that we delivered in this project. It's about midway through the project, has a lower capital cost subsidy, a lot of other administrative components to it, which can cost a bit of money, and is focused more on larger solar home systems, productive uses of solar, potentially maybe also some pico and microgrids. It will build 5 large mini-grids, but hasn't had a specific focus on pico or microgrids at this moment yet. But that may become part of it as we get through that project. So that brings us to Solution C, pico grids, which are generally 50 to 5,000 watts. They could be DC or AC. Excuse me. And generally have a bit of a longer payback period, maybe getting up to 5 years compared to the solar home systems, which are generally 1 to 3 years, and often doesn't involve transfer of ownership to the end customer. It is more of a micro-utility model where a company or organisation will probably own most of the assets outside the house for most of the time. To help plan an optimum mix of solar home systems and grids in Vanuatu, the first step VIA likes to take in any market is to map where all the households are. So this was done a very long time ago, back around 2012-13, and we were hoping to actually build a mix of technologies, but the VREP 1 project distorted the market with a 50% subsidy for solar home systems and nothing else. And that distortion more or less continues now with VREP 2. So we had to pivot with our model to only focus on solar home systems. Unfortunately, these don't have a lot of backup, whereas a microgrid might with a backup generator. So when a cyclone comes through, as it did in 2015, probably all the solar home system lights will run out of juice in 1 or 2 days, and everybody will be in the dark just when they need power. So there's possibilities that we could expand the range of technologies and have a more robust power plan for the country than is currently being promoted by the World Bank and the government, but that will be something to address in the future, hopefully before the next large catastrophe. Thus, our project design focused on solar home systems with lights and phone charging systems in the households, mixed together with productive uses, particularly in this case, solar mills. We did do a few small trials of water pumps, refrigeration, crop dryers, solar cookers, and a few other things, but the main focus was on solar milling, which might be shared between 20 to 30 households each, bringing down the per house cost to as low or if not lower than the solar home systems, and roughly $150 to $200 per household being the investment. The pay-as-you-go solar lighting technologies that were tried initially were, as you can see here, but we mostly focused on the lowest cost and smallest system, the 6-watt Greenlight Planet system, after seeing the value for money comparisons between the technologies and having some technical issues with one of these suppliers that had up to a 50% failure rate back in 2016, which hopefully has improved since then. So the 6-watt Greenlight solar home system was the primary product of installation, and particularly for this project was the only product installed. And as mentioned, we did have some problems with Omnivoltaic that hopefully have been improved since then. And the other products were a little too expensive for what we wanted, and we wanted to keep the loans quite small. So the Facera system was a little bit too expensive at 20 watts. The solar home system business model is using a $75 landed price after the cost of importing and paying taxes, and then around $8 to $9 per month of payment over a 24-month period. This is ignoring the subsidy, what we would do in the natural market. And from that gross revenue of 24,000 Vatu, we share 30% of that with the local team. 10% for village agents, 10% for regional managers who collect money from the village agents, and 10% for the national manager who collects from the regional managers. There also needs to be an allowance for 15% of VAT. So about 2/3 of the net revenue comes back, and this can obviously cover the $8,000 installation cost, plus up to 20% of interest or default. We were using capital that did not require interest to be paid, and therefore we could tolerate quite a high level of default. So we were not expecting to have 2 or 5% default levels for the project, and design the project according to a likely fairly high default level. Here's a team in action. Paul Hannon is a manager of Vanuatu Rural Services Cooperative, the only non-Ni Vanuatu in the cooperative, and he provides some management expertise and has since settled in Vanuatu permanently, and the rest of the team is local. And my wife is there working on the administration side of things, Stanislava, and she was our master of coin and made sure all the Vatus flowed where they should, and did a lot of training with the women entrepreneurs as well. So we learned a lot during this project, no doubt about it, both local and expats. On the solar mill side of things, this is the world's basically first and largest range of solar mills that was developed in partnership with Project Support Services Papua New Guinea, psspng.com. Feel free to go to their website to see a video of the mills in action. And with support from USAID's Powering Agriculture and various other donors, including BPP, we've together managed to develop some 7 or 8 different solar mill technologies and deliver those to Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and various other countries around the world, including a rice huller, rice polisher, coconut grater, cassava grater, corn sheller, flour grinder, and a meat or kava mincer. For those of you who don't know what kava is, it's a root from underground which is ground up and water strained through it to produce a mouth-numbing drink that tastes absolutely awful. But it is one of the biggest commodities in Vanuatu and dearly loved by many. So the kava mincer is very popular. We've got a few other technologies also under development. This is a bit of a screenshot from the PSS website, and you can see some of the technologies here with the rice machines on the right, coconut and cassava at the back there. Please note, if you do see the video, that the cassava grater has now changed to a different model and design that's considerably improved compared to that design there. And we don't use the coconut grater spinning ball of death that you'll see there as much anymore. In the foreground is the corn shelling machine on the left, and the flour grinder on the right, which is shown in this video to grind both dried cassava and dried corn. The system runs off a 24-volt DC system and battery without an inverter, and DC motors have been fitted here. So you can see the manual process of grating cassava as one example here on the left, either a spiky stick from the bush or a sheet of tin with holes punched in it with a nail to form an oversized cheese grater. And women will generally use this for 30 to 60 minutes a day to grate several kilograms of cassava root into a bit of a mash, a process which only takes a few minutes on the 250 watt cassava grater that you see on the right hand side here. We did various demonstrations. One of the regional managers, Valette, here is on the left, talking it up to some customers. And we had hundreds of people come through a number of demonstration projects in the 2 years in various different locations. A lot of interest, a lot of excitement, but upfront cost and affordability, of course, an issue, which is why Village Infrastructure Angels is there to offer these over 3-year loans and provide financing to make these affordable. So the solar mill technologies had different prices for the various different mills, but pro rata a similar package. The landed price for the mills was generally between $650 and $2,300 US, and the cash sale locally was around Vaatu $150,000 to $500,000. For the lease purchase, which at the moment we do not have formal pay-as-you-go technology in there, in the mills, and that's something we're working on integrating this year and next to have that available. Would involve, for the lowest cost products such as a cassava grater, a 70,000 Vaatu landed price and generating 180,000 Vaatu over 3 years at 5,000 per month. We do not need a 10% share of the revenue with the village agent in this situation because we're just looking mostly at regional managers operating these mills and getting paid for collecting that money, and the village agent gets to keep a lot of that revenue as well, that they make from the mill, and from the revenue that they've made they need to pay the flat rate of 5,000 per month. So we're pretty much working on a flat rate payment per month, and hopefully they make the use of the mill. Typically you're looking at, say, Vaatu 10 per kilogram to be processed. So to make more than 5,000 per month they need to process more than about 500 kilograms, and the machine can do about 30 kilograms an hour. So probably using the machine for about 15 hours in a month, about half an hour per day on average. So anything more than half an hour per day, and they should be beyond break even for the cost of the machine and making a profit. And generally the demand is there for that extra profit. This results in a net revenue which again can cover about 25% interest or default. So again, being quite realistic about what's going to happen. And we did start with just sharing 50% of whatever revenue there was, but we feel that revenue was probably actually underreported as a result, and so we switched to a monthly fixed fee, and later we hope to introduce pay-as-you-go. There was not a great deal of resistance to that switch, and very few returns of the solar mills, so we feel that it's probably a fairly affordable situation. 5,000 Vatu is approximately $45 per month, or roughly about $10 per week. So the original project targets were to install 3,000 solar home systems and 60 mills. Because we were coming under budget, we increased these voluntarily by 30%, up to 4,000 solar home systems and 80 mills, and we actually delivered at least 4,000 solar home systems. Actually 5,300 were shipped, but some are still in inventory in headquarters, and considerably more mills than were required due to the needs of other co-funders of the project. So the landed costs were around $42 million. The gross revenue expected included the 50% subsidy after you take off 15% VAT. So that's 8,500 Vatu of subsidy and 10,000 Vatu from the customers themselves, who now, because of the 50% subsidy, only have to pay for 1 year instead of 2. And then an average of about 200,000 Vatu for the mills. We're giving a total of about 99,000 Vatu. As mentioned, we would share 30% of that revenue for solar home systems with the collection agents, and 20% with the local team for collecting that money. And of course, there's the 15% share of any subsidy that's collected as well, because that's a lump sum, so it's a smaller share. And that gives a net revenue of about $69 million, which is definitely enough to cover the landed costs should all that revenue come through, even with a 20 to 25% default. However, clearly, the 34 million Vatu of VREP 1 subsidy is a very important component of that, making up almost half of net revenue. So if we are not able to secure that subsidy, which you'll see later was a bit of a problem, then the project becomes unprofitable. If there's any default over 5% as well, then we would definitely have a problem. And if we've got very high default, plus the subsidy not coming through, then we won't recover any of the capital, any of the 42 million at all. We'll only have enough to cover the operating expenses. The shared objectives of the project were as follows: to increase access to electricity, create a functional, sustainable business model, improve financial inclusion in terms of getting microfinance loans out to communities that have never had it before, and helping these communities to connect to new technologies and markets with their value-added agricultural products, and promoting women's economic empowerment. So this is what we were measured against. We also had some individual objectives next to the shared objectives. So VIA wanted to build some new relationships with DFAT and potentially other partners, access new sources of funding, and hopefully develop a best practice example of development-focused innovation that's not just solar home systems, but also focuses on a blend of that with productive uses, particularly with a focus on productivity for women. DFAT had its individual objectives as well, to leverage wider resources and it can provide by itself. So VIA helped to leverage those wider resources, being a private sector participant, to test out the business partnerships platform efficiency and effectiveness, for engaging with private sector partners, and as we're doing here, sharing lessons learned, and to build a relationship with a new specific private sector partner, ourselves, and focus on energy in the Pacific, including renewable energy. So how'd we do? Time to look at some of the results. So indeed, a big tick for reaching the number of households. We are still verifying some of the last 1,000 households that got solar lighting. I think the specific number is 3,134 that we are able to verify because there is some lag in the time it takes to bring back paper records from the village agents. So we do not have a completely real-time understanding of how many customers we have at any time. And the products are spread around 30 inhabited islands, which takes a long time for personal visits if they're required, if the data's not coming back through electronic means, as it should be, but doesn't always happen. So we certainly delivered on the original 3,000 household target, and likely have also managed to hit around 4,000 households, if not now, then in the extremely near future. The solar mills were over-delivered, as mentioned, so got plenty of those in there. And this helped about 20 to 25,000 people gain access to electricity, which is around 15% of the off-grid market, or 10% increase for the country as a total. So a fairly good result for our access to electricity. Do we have a functional, sustainable business model? Well, let's deal with the first word, functional. We've had a very low failure rate on the solar lights, focusing on the Greenlight Planet product. Possibly in recent months that may have crept up to 2% rather than 1%. The later shipments were a little bit more dodgy than the first shipment, but still a very impressive 99-98% success rate for the solar lights, and they're well appreciated by the customers. Bookkeeping needs improvement to keep track of deployments, and there's quite a bit of work to be done there, but overall the data was still flowing back fairly well. Not so well in recent months, but we're pushing hard to improve on that. The lithium iron phosphate battery has a 5 to 7 year expected life, and so we've literally had no requests for new batteries for the solar lights. We have had some higher failure rates with the new technology of solar mills, but pretty much all of this was repairable. Broken pulley belts, fuses, things like that. Some of the batteries are starting to get a bit old now, but the latest ones that went out, we switched over from lead acid to lithium iron phosphate as well. So they should have quite a long life. In impact surveys, we found the customer satisfaction rate was 95 to 99% for the lighting and milling services. So pretty much seemed to be quite a functional service delivery and business model. Sustainable? Nah, well, not so good. So 50% of customers have completed their solar lighting lease, and the remaining have paid about half of what they should have. So literally ending up at somewhere like a 25% default, as expected. Recent policy changes in the last shipment have helped to decrease this default by about 50%, where we've introduced a deposit that we didn't have before. So with a pretty sizable deposit for the new products, we saw a decrease in default to around 10 to 12% from 25%. So we think we're improving on that. Further 15% revenue losses from the agent network because we don't have mobile money in the country. We can't send money digitally. It's collected by cash, and it gets more and more concentrated the further along the chain you go. And unfortunately, 15% of that was lost to theft from both agents and regional managers. And therefore, a combined loss of default and theft resulted in only 60% of revenue reaching the bank. We are trying to improve the theft issue as well, of course, by firing bad agents and regional managers who don't subscribe to the policy of the project. So therefore we feel that we can probably, in a replica of this project, decrease the lost revenue from 40% to 10 to 20%, should we be able to secure funding for future projects. Unfortunately, it's been 100% default for the VREP 1 subsidy so far. We've been working for about 3 years to try and gain acceptance by the World Bank to the program. The local Department of Energy has accepted us twice, but we have not yet seen a cent of the subsidy come through, which unfortunately dwarfs the amount of revenue loss from default and theft, and pretty much destroys the business plan. So if no subsidy is paid, we can at least demonstrate that we were cash flow positive. Money was coming in sufficient to cover operating costs, but there would be no recovery of the capital invested, which fortunately came mostly from grants rather than repayable loans. So it's fortunate that we didn't try to do this with fully commercial money at this stage. We are still hopeful the VREP 1 subsidy issue will be resolved in the next 6 months, and negotiations do continue, and we may yet see a positive result for the project with maybe most of the capital recovered if that comes through, maybe up to 80% of the capital. If we can then also decrease the default and theft, then we may start to look at positive returns being possible in the next project. If there was no subsidy and people just paid for 2 years instead of 1 year, that could also generate positive returns for the project. So a bit of a mixed scorecard there on sustainability. Financial inclusion. 4,000 mostly rural households received a 1 to 5 year loan for lights or mills that they pretty much never had before, either from a bank or a microfinance agency. So hence, financial inclusion has indeed increased. The average loan is smaller than others, but we have similar OPEX costs to more urban-focused microfinance organisations, if not higher. And the key to dealing with this small loan and high operating costs is aggregation. That's the key role that the village agents play to allow some increase in efficiency of the project. And in the future, we're starting to see some evidence that mobile money may also come to Vanuatu and help to decrease the manual collection costs of cash, and therefore also, of course, opportunity for theft. Increased connectivity, bit of a question mark there. We've seen time savings and evening lighting have allowed more weaving time for the villagers, and a market linkage program has helped sell dozens of mats and baskets as well, so there is a connection to markets, but not necessarily a lot more connection on mobile phones. There's been less money spent on phone charging, but we couldn't demonstrate for certain that people are using the phones more or internet more or anything like that. So maybe a modest increased connectivity. Certainly greater asset ownership for women's economic empowerment. Globally, almost all diesel and electric mills are owned by men. And in this situation, in this project, we had 46% of mills operated by women. The solar mills are a lot easier to maintain. They're small, mobile, don't have to change fuel and oil change and things like that. So they're quite friendly to operate, and women seem to appreciate this. Increased income is obviously part of economic empowerment as well, and surveys suggest that up to $120 per month of extra income could be generated from each mill. This could be explained, for example, as 25 customer visits per week, spending $1 or $2 for each visit to the mill to process 10 to 20 kilograms of crop per visit. We're also seeing that people spend maybe 2 hours per week more on income-generating activities, both lighting and milling customers. So lighting extends the hours in the evening and milling saves manual labour. So both of those allow more time to do something else. And about 30% of those earned about $20 per month more. So we're definitely seeing an economic impact which will be evaluated for the entire project a little bit later. Decreased expenditure as well helps to complement increased income. We're looking at around $1.50 per week saved from kerosene and candle expenditure after year one of ownership for another 3 to 5 years, and therefore households are likely to save about $200 to $350 during the lifetime of the solar home system. The time savings that we saw from the mills was a decrease from 40 to 60 minutes per day to 10 to 20 minutes, saving about half an hour per day. In other countries, like Indonesia, we've seen even more minutes per day saved from that. About 40% of the 4,000 customers reported using the mills. And it was fairly constant across different crops. This totals about 180 hours per year for each customer, and almost 300,000 hours saved for the project, which is the equivalent of 144 full-time jobs created. So it's a significant amount of time being saved. There's a lot of time-saving opportunities that are energy-related. If we can replace cooking with wood with solar electricity and improve cook stoves, then and gas, that's one opportunity. There's other opportunities in terms of fetching water. If you can put solar water pumps into the village and even piped water systems around the village. Washing clothes, even a solar-powered washing machine could save even more time again. So altogether, there's a possibility to be saving even 1 or 2 entire days per week for women when you combine these together with solar mills and various other technologies to increase women's economic empowerment. So it's a lot more work to be done with a lot more technologies. So the financial rate of return on the project wasn't too good due to the theft and defaults by customers and lack of subsidy flow, but the economic rate of return of the project can still be evaluated in terms of the benefits for the households versus what's been spent. So we had a cost of the program of around $150 to $200 per household for the lights and mills, but we estimate that the economic benefit through reduced expenditure on kerosene, lighting, candles, phone charging, torch battery costs, and an increase in income for households as well, even though it's only 30% of them, adds up quite significantly to around $770 per household. And therefore you're looking at a considerably high economic rate of return and benefit for the end beneficiaries, which probably leads to the high customer satisfaction rate. But if the if the investor's rate of return on the technologies is very low, around 0 to 10%, then we may need to rebalance the project to ensure that investors get a substantial return for their investment at possibly a slightly lower return for the end beneficiaries. We can also focus on other things like decreasing the costs of the technologies. We believe we can decrease the cost of the solar mills and introduce other aspects as well that like pay-as-you-go technology on the mills to help decrease losses in the system. But this is a careful thing that every social entrepreneur needs to think about. Are you giving too much benefit to your own customer and cutting your own throat on the business model? So these are a delicate kind of balance that we sometimes don't get right. How did our individual objectives go? Well, for VIA, yes, we built that relationship with not just a DFAT in Australian government, but also local Vanuatu departments of industry for the mills and energy for the lights, as well as made an important link with a Melbourne engineer who's now working pro bono on a solar-powered rice cooker as a new technology as well. However, we didn't really do too well on the capital raising side of things other than DFAT. We have had the UK government sign a $1.5 million Australian dollar 3-year grant to help develop a second generation of mills, which should be up to 50% cheaper and hopefully a bit more efficient. But we've attracted absolutely no interest from Australia so far in bringing more solar lights and mills to Vanuatu. And of course, the World Bank in Sydney blocking those subsidies so far, even after local approvals, has not really helped attract investors. So hopefully they will unblock those subsidies, and that will allow more investment to flow, or otherwise the program may not continue into the future, which would be a bit of a shame. We are currently raising $5 to $10 million globally, including what we would hope would be $1 or $2 million for Vanuatu. There's a bit of interest from Europe and USA, and not much from Australia or New Zealand, although we keep on working on those markets to see what we can uncover. So time will tell how successful we are there. Have we demonstrated a best practice example of development-focused innovation? I don't think we can blow our own trumpet on that one too much, so we'll let you decide on that. But it is certainly a Tier 2 plus package. We've put those community-scale productive uses in together with the consumer-focused appliance solar home systems, and we will continue to mix those technologies together in future projects, as we are also in Indonesia and Honduras. Compared to lighting PNG or lighting Vanuatu, because we're leasing these products to people instead of selling for cash, we've added financial inclusion to what is currently the largest pay-as-you-go solar project in the Pacific. We've also decentralized the mills of the Pacific. The coconut oil mills, there's just a couple of large ones in the villages, in the country. We now have 125 small micro mills around the country, adding value at the village level instead of through centralized corporations. So this can definitely have a value-adding effect. Some villages have been making ground-up spices, cassava flour, and coconut oil as a result. We've delivered significant time savings and have proven to some extent that these have been converted into increased income. So it's not as investable as just straight solar home lighting systems. It does have longer payback periods because of the mills. It has struggled at the moment to attract investment. There was an entity called Pacific Rise that was in the area several years ago having a look at the project, but just wasn't too interested. However, more recently they've had a second look and think they might be able to do something. So we got our fingers crossed there. Have we leveraged wider resources from the private sector? Absolutely. We did invest more into this project. We actually exceeded our budget match of the 500,000 Australian that DFAT put in. We were supposed to put in 710,000. We ended up actually putting in more because of the extra mills. And that was co-funded by USAID Powering Agriculture and the French FISP project. So far, zero from the World Bank, NZ aid originally, but could be potentially a substantial amount from there as well if that comes through. And looking to the future, we will hopefully see a share of that new grant from the UK also coming to Vanuatu as well in the future. Around a 2 times leverage to the BPP funding, and that's pretty normal for these sorts of programs where aid and private money come together. So I think we've done pretty well on that leverage. Have we tested the BPP platform's efficiency and effectiveness? The efficiency compared to other aid projects of this particular platform, I don't know how that's measured. Is it by leverage? Is it dollars per unit outcome of results? I don't know exactly how you measure that efficiency. Similarly, effectiveness. So maybe some measurement characteristics, for example, comparing Powering Ag to BPP. I don't know how you could say which is more or less efficient or effective. Our impression was that BPP was fairly slow from the initial win announcement to an actual contract, about 9 months, but not as slow as others and not as fast as others. We've had some dreadfully slow results like that, up to 18 months in the past. I won't name any names. And we've had some very fast ones, such as USAID being only 4 months, for example. The reporting load we had is about medium. We've had more intense reporting requirements from some, less from others, and using a fixed price contract rather than a verified expenditure contract could help reduce it, because in a fixed price contract, the funder doesn't actually care what you spent or have not spent. They're paying for outputs, and that's it. So you don't have to do a lot of expense reporting, and we found that took a lot of time off. But across all of our aid projects in the last 4 years, we've written about 600,000 words, or the equivalent of 10 PhDs of documentation, which has probably taken about a year of full-time equivalent staff time. That's a lot of extra reporting on top of what's supposed to be a business model, and it takes away from the time that you can spend in the field fixing the problems. So anything that can reduce the reporting load for aid projects is seriously worth considering, because it could literally be counterproductive to be doing too much reporting and not actually working on the business. So I think the funds have definitely helped from BPP to prove what might be a replicable growth model, but it's early days, and we still need another round of funding to see if we do actually have a good Tier 2 plus growth model. A list of our current supporters included here, including the funders of Powering Ag, some seed funding from Rotary Melbourne, and GSMA was in there earlier before the BPP project. In Honduras, we've had support from IDB and Roots of Impact. Irene started some of the very first solar mill work many years ago. So we're very grateful to all of the funders of this project, and of course DFAT BPP as well. The individual objectives for DFAT, hopefully they're fairly happy that a new relationship has been built, including with a focus on renewables and sharing lessons learned. I think it's been more of a relationship with DFAT in Vanuatu than in Canberra that was formed during the project. And we did try to engage a bit more with DFAT on upcoming projects in Papua New Guinea, but it's had limited interest at this stage. Our rural electrification software is being used in Philippines, Haiti and Nigeria. You saw some of the mapping earlier that we did, but we were unable to win support from a DFAT project in Cambodia, and it's not really yet being used in Papua New Guinea and seems of limited interest to use it in Vanuatu. So, we're trying our best to add value in the Pacific as we are in other countries with World Bank support in those other countries and interest from those governments in those other countries. But in the Pacific or within DFAT, it seems a little bit harder. Digicel in Papua New Guinea has expressed some interest in sharing lessons learned on the pay-as-you-go solar expenses, but not at this stage IFC or Origin Energy, who are doing similar work. DFAT is also doing some solar mill projects in Papua New Guinea, but could not share those results with us, even though we helped to make those results happen. So it's a little frustrating to not be able to access some of the results of projects that you've participated in. I'll speak a little bit more on the rural electrification software as well here, seeing as it's been mentioned. We started this in 2014 with the household mapping, as you've seen, expanded that to network design and analysis and optimization, and have recently partnered with a UK company to achieve industrial scale to be able to handle really large data sets. So we believe this can help to design more robust solutions for Vanuatu and other countries, combining in a rational way solar home systems, mini-grids and grid extension. And that, of course, brings us to solution D, micro and mini-grids. So these tend to be larger systems, usually AC rather than DC, compared to the picogrids, and tend to be serving hundreds or even thousands of households, and currently seem to have pretty long year payback periods, to which we think we can help with that payback period. They generally average around $1,000 per house, but you could probably bring that down to $500 with a few tricks. Again, more of a micro utility model than a transfer of ownership to end customers for this one as well. And then there's grid extension as well. It's typically quite expensive. It's where probably most of the rural electrification money in the world goes still, even though it is expensive. And the payback periods are very, very long and often actually don't even make their money back that was spent to install them in the first place. So it has its place, but increasingly is under competition from micro picogrids and solar home systems. You are also seeing in Western markets the grid and solar combining into larger kilowatt scale systems costing thousands of dollars per household, and typically having around a 7 to 10 year payback. So this can also be applied to villages where one system for a Western house might power an entire village, but they can talk to each other through the grids. So you could actually interconnect these together in quite a nice way. So this is an example of households in a random area where we've mapped. You can see the existing grid coming in from the left, and you can see some designs in tightly clustered areas of small and large mini-grids and picogrids, some sensible grid extension where it makes sense, and in the highly dispersed areas, some yellow markers showing the solar home systems that are likely to make sense in a rational environment. You can also plan for the interconnection of such clusters in the future. So as the load for electricity goes up, the demand goes up, and the revenue goes up, some of these extra lines can help interconnect these households and clusters together. Excuse me, and allow some forward planning. An interesting extra layer we added was basically the idea of productive use centres, such as solar mills, to be able to serve clusters of households and to optimise the location of such centres so that households have a minimum walk within 1 or 2 kilometres to be able to access community scale tier 2 plus productive uses of power, whether they're coming to the grid, to a pico or microgrid, or whether an isolated centre is serving a cluster of solar home system users. So we think this is a very nice way to demonstrate how equal access to energy can be given to all households, regardless of where they are. So coming to the close of the presentation, where do we go from here? We need to scale up our business model from 6,000 households in Vanuatu. That's 3,000 to 4,000 from BPP, plus a couple of thousand before them, and a few extra mills. And we're also functional in Indonesia and Honduras, where we need to try and scale up each country to at least 10,000 households to be able to break even with about $1 or so million of assets under management, probably closer to $2 million of assets under management per country. We also help others design these sorts of projects as well, with the software work, with sourcing products from different suppliers, reducing costs wherever possible, and potentially even ongoing asset management if they would like us to help with a project on a long-term basis. These consulting services help to pay the bills, while our village projects are very small, which is why VIA is profitable. So the break-even analysis for Vanuatu Cooperative, which was formed for the project in late 2017, the lack of the working capital coming back from the project from the subsidy payment has unfortunately destroyed any plans to extend the project in 2020, which will be the year that is spent trying to survive while capital raising is undertaken to replace that missing working capital. If the cooperative has expenses of, say, $100,000 per year and can make 30% operating margin, then it would need around $300,000 per year of revenue. And that would suggest, if people are paying about $9 a month for solar lighting, plus a bit more for milling maybe around 3,000 to 4,000 households. After you take into account defaults and things like that, possibly 5,000 to 10,000 households is more realistic and would allow a higher operating cost per year. So the next step is to complete the French project that we're still running with them by mid-year, and then continue to raise the capital. The break-even analysis for VIA, if we're making 5% on assets under management and have expenses of half to $1 million per year, then we need about 10 to 20 million of assets under management, which is currently just $1.5 million. So that's probably about 50 to 100,000 households. Quite a few pay-as-you-go solar companies have not been profitable at 50 to 100,000 households. So we still think even this is fairly lean compared to many other business models out there at the moment. But we are already profitable now because of the other part of the business, where we are helping with other people's projects through the consulting services. Where might this capital come from? Well, one possibility, particularly for the Pacific, is right nearby in Australia, where 20% at least of Australia has rooftop solar power. That's 2 million households. And 30% manage their own pension money, their superannuation, $500 billion in total. So that's $100 billion worth of solar angels who might potentially help others get solar as well if the risk of losing their capital is insulated against. Just a fraction of 1% of this capital would be enough to achieve energy access for all in Papua New Guinea and the Pacific. So that's a very exciting potential if we can help make it happen. So that's about it in terms of the presentation. We've now got plenty of time for questions and things like that. So please fire away. I noted one last question there from Cyril about why mini-grids are more resilient to tornadoes and home systems. I would actually say they're not. I would say a small solar home system is more resilient than a mini-grid, evidenced by the 30 to 40% destruction of the mini-grid in Haiti by Earthspark. It's difficult to build a solar mini-grid that can withstand a 300-kilometre wind, but pulling the solar panel down off your roof and hiding it under your bed is a strategy that seems to be working quite well. So in recent cyclones in the last few years, not as big as Cyclone Pam from 15, but still up around Category 3, Category 4 cyclones, we've seen a pretty good survival rate of solar panels and systems when people simply bring them inside. That, of course, means no solar power. So the lack of redundancy in a solar home system only strategy is pretty self-evident. And hopefully one day we'll have some nice little skinny underground wires connecting the most clustered households together, and maybe some recharging points for the most dispersed households to get some backup power for the top up their batteries later on. So hopefully the future is more about skinny grids where the grid is there for backup rather than just individual solar home systems by themselves or just centralized mini grids either. Yep, and I think Richard Corkish is backing up our conclusions there as well with his own experience on Tanner. Just try and bring everything inside. So thanks very much, Richard, asking about interest in geothermal. It's very site-specific, geothermal, so it does have its potential. A low-cost, micro-scale, organic Rankine cycle turbine doesn't really exist so much. It's going to be very hard to do micro geothermal to compete with solar and batteries as we go along. But again, to get up to 99.9% reliability, price is not necessarily as important. I'd be a lot more excited about growing algae in villages, because you can grow it in a small pond, very concentrated, small amount of land area, and you can save the fuel up for when you need it. And it's applicable everywhere, as opposed to geothermal. I think it's good to investigate all options, but it still also needs to be cost effective with other technologies out there that are getting cheaper and cheaper. So thanks for the suggestions there as well about Rocky Mountain Institute. Has a recent report there, so something to look forward to. But it can end up that your civil works, when built to withstand a cyclone, exceed the cost of the solar panel itself, doubling the cost of energy generation. So for an event that might only happen once every 3 to 5 years, and during that event, you're generating no power anyway. So, to be honest, I think the most cost-effective strategy is avoiding the event. Question here from Alessandro about the concept of swarm electrification. Yes, we are looking at that in quite a bit of depth. As mentioned, we'd already designed all the microgrids for the entire country and would have dearly loved to have brought pico grids to or interconnected solar home systems to the Vanuatu market, but there was absolutely no subsidy or technical interest support in that until the last year or two. So we've been banging that drum for a while, and I'm glad to hear that with a bit of UNDP funding, you guys have got the first pilot project up on Lalepa. There's a very simple cost-benefit analysis that we can apply to get high reliability for a solar home system. All you really need is a charging point from effectively a larger power station, like a solar mill, that might also have a backup generator, and to be able to bring a battery to that charging point. And the cost of that charging point is only going to be about $10. To connect households with wire, it costs in a swarm electrification or a pico grid, whether you've got distributed solar panels or a centralized solar panels, $10 only buys you about 10 meters of wire. So as soon as your house-to-house average distance goes beyond about 10 or 20 meters, the pico grid and swarm electrification models are not as cost-effective as perhaps just providing a charging point. So it really comes down to population density. There's no single solution that's best. That's where the mapping is so important, to apply the correct model in high density locations and alternatives in low density locations. And I haven't come across another software that actually models DC pico grids against AC alternatives like you guys are doing. And I think DC pico grids are a lot closer to the most cost-effective option than AC microgrids so far. So if there's no further questions, we'll make that a wrap. And thank you very much to the hardcore remaining. And much appreciated. We'll probably do a few more webinars this year as a few more results of projects pour out. Another one in Indonesia will come up around mid-year, I'd say. And we might do one on the software modeling as well. Okay. Thanks, everyone. That's a wrap.